Thank you. Hi, I'm Julian. I've studied sports science at the University of Salzburg, and in my master's, I've researched about the effect of differential learning on the aiming skill acquisition. I was supported there by my professor, Dr. Thomas Stöckel. I want to start with a quote: "To improve is to change, to be perfect is to change often." And this already summarizes the road of the next 20 minutes. Aiming. Aiming on the PC is the process of accurately targeting in-game objects. And in this study, it's focused on the mouse precision, especially. Aiming is considered one of the basic mechanics of Counter-Strike, and according to experts in 2022, the reaction time and the mouse control are one of the most important skills in shooter games. But what does the game-independent aiming skill actually tell us about the rank? And is this game-independent skill actually trainable? There is a lack of aiming-related research addressing the skill acquisition. There were basically two groups. One group addressed the skill acquisition of aiming in Counter-Strike with an additional neurostimulation on top of it, and the other group checked mouse weight and different mouse weights according to the skill acquisition. And the thing they both used in common was both used fixed targets. Fixed targets in sports is called the repetitive approach. As you can see, this is a goal, and there are a few targets. And if you're trying to shoot repetitively at the same targets, this is called the repetitive approach. Yeah, fixed targets. And by shooting several times at the same target, you're trying to minimize the deviation of it. In contrast to the repetitive approach, there's the variability-driven approach. And this variability-driven approach is, according to the sports scientific research of the last decades, better than the repetitive approach. And this has been proven in shot put, in volleyball, or even in a fine motoric ability called handwriting. Yeah. There are several different variability-driven approaches, and there has been shown inconclusive results between them. However, on fine motoric skills like aiming, for example, the differential learning method seems to be advantageous compared to low variability methods. And this is especially during the retention phase. The retention phase is, as you can see on this example, the ongoing learning phase beyond the actual intervention. How does differential learning actually looks in esports, in sports in general? There is basically one main claim: never repeat an exercise twice. Because according to Schönauer, learning works self-organized. This means that we have to show many different variables, and the learner, the user, learns self-organized. We do not have to tell him how he actually needs to perform it. We just need to show variability, and he decides what is the perfect way to learn. And the second thing is, learning depends on the intentional variability. Meaning, if one person tries to shoot 10 times exactly the same, we have variability, but this variability is not intentional. Meaning, we learn the first time, but the other 9 times are just redundant. Back to the shooting example. In a free kick example, it means like constantly changing technique if you're trying to shoot at a goal, like shooting faster, slower with a different technique. Or changing the actual instruments, like a heavier ball, a lighter ball, or a different friction. There are basically 2 sides that come into play talking about aiming technique and its variation. On the one side, there are different sensory-motor capabilities. Meaning, on the fingers, we are more sensitive compared to upper arm movement. However, our movement with the whole arm, we have a way bigger movement compared to the movement only with the fingers. This led to a theoretical framework, meaning that we change our technique based upon the task. Meaning, if we need to follow a small target with a small range of movement, we are using rather the fine motoric muscles and the fine motoric movement, so to say. And on the other side, the big targets with the big movement, we are rather using our whole arm, the arm aimers, so to say. The 3 research questions were as follows: is a game-independent aiming skill even trainable? The second, does 3 weeks of added aim training lead to direct and maintained improvement in aiming skill compared to a control group? And the third one, does high variability training lead to a greater improvement in the aiming skill compared with a low variability practice? Yeah, it looks weird. Yeah, okay, the methods. Yeah, there were 36 participants, and the inclusion criteria were at least 1 hour of playtime per week on shooter games using mouse and keyboard. And it happened to be that there were mainly Austrian students, and there were mostly casual gamers and a few semi-professional players. They were randomized, allocated into one of 3 groups: the high variability group, the low variability group, and the control group. The methodology was as follows. First, there was the pre-phase, where they were familiarized with the test equipment, with the test session. They adjusted their own settings and tested these tasks. And then there was the intervention phase, where the high variability group and the low variability group performed the training and the control group did not. And then there was the retention phase, which was beyond the second test session, where no group trained at all. The test software is called AimLab. There were 2 different tasks used. On the one side, there is tracking, which means tracking a consistent movement target for a period of 60 seconds, and you get points if you are on top of the target, and you lose points if you're off. And then there is flicking, which required fast movements, reoccurring actions every second to a target where you have to shoot it. And the mean times, the mean of the 5 times were used for the further calculation. And these had been shown reliable in a previous unreleased study. So the intervention. There was the low variability group, which trained flicking and tracking. And there was the high variability group that trained tracking and flicking plus additional variability. A new software was created to apply those changes to both groups. So both groups can train in the same software, where things like audio or different patterns that could appear did not matter. And the thing is, the 60-second period was changed to a 5-second break and a 10-second action block. This led to a total of 20 minutes of test session time, where 5 minutes were tracking, 5 minutes were flicking, and 10 minutes were the actual break. The intention of the high variability group was to create unique patterns during those 10 seconds. And this was performed by changing the technique constantly and changing the sense every 10 seconds. The green block, the break, the 5 seconds, meant in the low variability group an actual break. In the high variability group, there was a break plus an additional movement specification. This was performed, there was always the movement shown on the screen on the top left during the break. The movement specification was as follows. There was the wrist movement, or the isolated shoulder rotation, or the isolated shoulder abduction, or an increase in mouse pressure, or a decrease in mouse pressure, plus an additional random mouse sensitivity in between plus 50 and minus 50% to the individual adjusted mouse sensitivity. The data that was recorded was the tracking and flicking points, which were calculated into the change of tracking and flicking. Then there was the rank at T1, which was transferred into the rank percentage. And then there was the playtime, which was calculated into the average playtime during the phases. The results were as follows. The graph shows with the black block the actual high variability group, the gray block was the low variability group, and the white block was the control group. This shows the playtime, and this group showed a decrease in habitual playtime together, but there was no time group interaction effect. The flicking results. On the left side, you can see the data, and on the right side, you can see the actual change between test session 2 and test session 1, and test session 3 and test session 1. And there was a main effect of time. Again, they increased in points, but there was no time and group interaction effect again. Now to the tracking results. There was a main effect of time and group and a group time interaction effect. A post hoc revealed after 3 weeks a significant difference between the high variability group and the control group, and after 6 weeks, even a highly significant difference between the high variability group and control group. This meant an average improvement of the high variability group of 12.4% and the low variability group of 4.85%. However, between the low variability group, there was no significant difference towards the control group or the high variability group. Now to the results, to the relationship between the rank and the actual aiming points. The primary game, most of them stated, was Valorant with 18 players, then there was Overwatch with 5 players, Counter-Strike 1, and 1 Apex players. A multiple regression was performed, aiming points towards the actual in-game rank, and there was a highly significant relationship towards it. Where flicking had a non-significant influence, however, tracking had a highly significant influence, with a correlation coefficient of 0.73. Now to the discussion, the flicking. The flicking actually showed limited influence on the rank in-game, especially compared to the tracking. And there was no difference to the control group, meaning independent of if they trained 9 times or if they didn't, they both improved in the same way. One theory that might improve this thing was that there are more familiarization sessions needed. That's the first idea. The second thing is that there is a limit trainability long-term looked at flicking. And the third thing is that there was a plateau. Meaning a few people in the higher skill group were plateaued. They reached the skill ceiling at the first time, meaning they had 98 to 100% accuracy even in the first test session. And this led to that they couldn't really improve on top of it without reacting 0.01 seconds earlier. The idea is to actually change it, is to adapt the flick ranges to the actual game, meaning the flick ranges that are needed in the game should be applied to the actual aim training, and by doing that, we might see a bigger influence on the actual in-game rank. The second is to change the system the flicking task works to make them progressive. Because if we make the task harder for the professionals, it's better, but for the lower end, it is not a good task anymore. It isn't a good test anymore. Now to the tracking. Tracking showed a strong relationship to the rank in-game. One theory why this is, especially according to the 18 Valorant players, could be the effect of image stabilization. It is also known as the proper crosshair placement, meaning if the user is able to do a proper crosshair placement to consistently aim where a person could be, he's able to react faster to it, in theory. There was a significant improvement after 3 weeks, and there was a significant improvement after 6 weeks. And the high variability training was 2.5 times more effective than the low variability training. However, this difference was not significant to interpersonal differences, to response differences. Additionally, the initial level had no impact on the improvement in points. Now the conclusion, trainability. Tracking seems to be highly trainable, especially with the high variability training. The low variability training didn't show that yet. Flicking does not seem trainable, especially with this task, where there were methodological flaws. The second thing is variability. It did not show a significant improvement compared to the low variability group. However, it reveals a good potential, in my opinion. And then there is flicking, which again didn't show differences. As I mentioned before, there were a few flaws in this study. especially because it was 6 weeks long. And 6 weeks for casual gamers to commit to one thing, even you should keep things straight, like I would tell them to not change their behavior, not change the playtime, not change the diet, not change the sleep. It's pretty hard to control it without a pretty good incentivization. So the next study should focus on that as well, or at least reduce the actual intervention time to just a few weeks to control it easier. The next thing, was there a conflict of interest? The result of this study led to the development of AIM Academy. AIM Academy is a science-based aim training software, and we try to identify the required skills and train them optimally. Meaning, if someone of you is trying to collaborate with us and create something great, you can do it. You just need to scan the QR code and then contact me. Thank you.